Bibles to the Gospel of Luke. We're reading chapter 24, 36 to the end. You remember a while ago we did that in Matthew, right? And we remember how Matthew ends? Go therefore into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Know that I'm with you, even to the end of the earth. Here's Luke's version of that. The Gospel of Luke, the evangelist of Luke, is going to have their own perspective on what sense Jesus wants to leave you with at the end of the Gospel. 24. Yeah, right to the end of the book. All right, are you with us? Have you turned there in your own Bible?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is why it takes so long to do this. So that you will turn. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. This is Jesus after the resurrection, right? He's risen, the disciples are with him. Are we? We are looking at something different on the screen. I'm early. I'm just reading. I've started at verse 24. I mean to start at verse 36. Thank you for letting me know that Jesus still, I promise, he rose from the dead, and he explained to them at the beginning with Moses all of these things. A while later, then, verse 36, while they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And they said, "And also with you." They didn't. They were startled and terrified. And they thought that they were seeing a ghost. And he said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet, and see that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you. Take everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, the Psalms. These things must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. And he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name in all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses to these things, and see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here into the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And while he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up to heaven. And they worshipped and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were continually in the temple praising God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So Jesus, after the resurrection, teaches his disciples, says, "This is why this makes sense. This is why I had to die. This is why I had to rise." And they're excited because he's back. And then he withdraws. And he rises to heaven. Elijah is training Elisha Elisha's getting ready. Elisha's faithful. He follows Elijah wherever he goes. But then Elijah says, I'm leaving. It's your turn. And Elisha says, I want a double portion of your spirit. The mantle is passed from Elijah to Elisha. We tell these stories every year because of this unbroken chain of leadership, which we call discipleship, apostolic succession. See, we believe that just as Elijah passed his mantle of leadership on to Elisha, just as the power of Elijah was on Jesus Christ, and he passed his authority on to the disciples, that those disciples made disciples, trained other people to follow Jesus, and those disciples trained other people to follow Jesus, and those people trained other people to follow Jesus, and that's how we all got here. This unbroken chain of apostleship. And I was planning to give one of the more nerdy sermons, right, this week. I was planning to talk about the importance of leaving a leadership vacuum. This interesting leadership principle, because you're all leaders. That sometimes the best thing that a leader does is quit and leave a vacuum, because then someone else who's a less experienced leader gets a chance to take that place of leadership, and that's actually really useful and helpful, and sometimes the best thing that we can do. We go off try new things that we're less good at, and somebody who's less good at our job takes our job, and that it's exponential. Anyway, I was going to talk about it. I had Hamilton was involved. There was a song from Hamilton I was going to use. I had this whole thing planned. And then Uvalde happened. And it was the third shooting in 2 weeks. And at first it didn't really hit me. I don't watch the news. I don't try to follow these things. But it broke me. Particularly as the thing that broke me, and I don't say this to point in any particular direction or to pick on anyone, but the stories about the police officers, where the police department had rushed in to bring their own sons and daughters out of the school, and then had people stationed outside pepper spraying parents from going and saving their own kids while a mass shooter was still in school, in a classroom with children. And it just broke me. And it's always a razor's edge to be broken on a Sunday morning and to speak from a place of brokenness. Because when I speak about myself and my own experiences and these kind of things, it's vulnerable. It puts me in a position to be criticized more effectively, to be criticized where it hurts. And actually, around this time last year, that was an issue. I had to back off and become much more kind of the distant scholar as opposed to the broken, suffering servant. But I want to try it again. I want to be broken with you, because I want to go there, because I think a lot of us need to go there. Because these things, these feelings that we're feeling, and I think most of us are feeling them, these are theological feelings. Our heartbreak for what's going on in Ukraine, our heartbreak for the community of Uvalde, for the things going on in the border, for just the news in general, our anxiety and grief of the past 2 years, they have impact on theological history, and I believe that the Bible, and I believe particularly this passage that I had planned to speak about and be nerdy about, has today application, and so I gotta go today. Because the temptation, when we see tremendous suffering, is to fall into despair. is to feel like there is nothing that you can do about it. And in fact, that there's nothing that anyone can do about it. It is just beyond saving. And that is something that we've taught in churches sometimes. It used to be, back in like 1900, that Christianity, we had this idea called the social gospel. And the social gospel said, hey, like we together, we the community of believers, blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. And together we're going to bring about like a heavenly community. We're going to make the world a better place. And then World War I happened. And we were like, wait a second, there's like more people dying than in any like previous conflict combined. And then after that, World War II happened, and people in the name of Jesus were committing genocide. And there was a theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr who was deeply, deeply influential. And he was trying to deal with the despair. He was trying to deal with the news, the things he was hearing in his native Germany, and figuring out, how do we believe this thing? How do we believe in apostolic succession? How do we believe that the church is coming into the world, that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, when so obviously the world is getting way worse? I mean, so obvious. Things aren't going towards heaven. Things are getting worse. Have you looked around? And he came up with this idea he called Christian realism. And Christian realism, he wanted to be realistic about Christianity. And in our age, when we think of being realistic, we probably think of like making Christianity work with evolution or something, synthesizing Christian thought with science and reason. But for him, it was synthesizing Christian thought with news, with reality. And so he came up with this idea that maybe Christianity is not really about what we do. Maybe Christianity is not really about building a community of faith and goodness and love and making the world a better place. Maybe Christianity is about where we go when we die. Maybe the point is just to believe in Jesus while the world gets worse, so he can rescue us from this horrible world. And he influenced teachers who influenced teachers who influenced all of us. That became the normative, dominant theology post-World War II, because it was the only thing we could access in the face of such darkness, and we're only beginning to start to climb out of it, to say, yeah, I mean, absolutely, there are irredeemable things we need salvation from, but there's also this aspect of responsibility and justice and apostolic succession and hope. Can we reclaim that glimmer of hope? And so these are theological things. These are things that they deal with. The theologians, the famous people that they paint on the paintings, are talking about this stuff. And so when we read the news, we engage with the same thing. And I want to encourage you. I want to give you something that's going to be useful in the light of it. In the light of this being the thing that is worth talking about. And that's this. It's not us. And there's not nothing you can do. It is not true that you can't help. It is not true that you can't do anything about the sin and the violence and the brokenness of the world. And I hope that will be encouraging for you. Unfortunately, the alternative that I'm encouraging you into is less despairing, but more overwhelming. And that's the reality that you have some responsibility. That you can do something, and actually we need you to. The world needs your action. The world needs your response and work to address the sin issues in the world. And that's incredibly, incredibly overwhelming. But it's true. I mean, that's what goes on when Jesus says, all right, let me remind you, in case anyone forgot. Okay, there was Moses and Moses freed the slaves. And then there was Elijah. And Elijah ended the drought. And then there's me. And I died for all of you. And next there's you. God. That's exciting. That's encouraging. Right? We've got a double portion of the Spirit of Jesus, and then we've got authority to cast out demons and to do the work of the Lord, but that's also deeply, deeply, deeply overwhelming. And eventually we have to ask the question of how? I mean, how do I even do that? I'm afraid when I hear this sermon that people are going to think what I hear, which is like, oh yeah, you've got power, you've got influence, go out and vote. And that's not really what I'm saying. I mean, yeah, voting's good. We live in a democracy, but that's not really a theological statement, right? Like, I don't know. Right now, speaking from my brokenness, speaking from where I am partial to the saying that if voting really changed anything, they wouldn't let us do it. Right? That's how I feel about voting right now. But I do think we can make a difference. And I want to give you a small example because, I don't want to go all the way here, which is there's nothing we can do. I want to say there's something we can do, but I don't want to go all the way over here and say it's all on you. It's all on your shoulders. You have to do everything. Right? I want to pull it back and say there are small things we can do with great love. It's a Mother Teresa quote. There are small things we can do with great love, and some of them are things that only you can do. So we're counting on you to do the small things. And to give an example, I'm actually going to do something I don't like to do, even though I did it a couple weeks ago. I'm going to tell you a story I'm proud of. Because I want to encourage you, and I want to set a good example for you. I prefer to be a bad example in stories, but this is something I'm immensely proud of. And I tell the story not so that you think, wow, Ryan's such a superhero, but so that you see how small the impulse is to make a tremendous change. Here's the thing I'm most proud of that I accomplished this year. I received word that there is a Ukrainian family of 5, and they are refugees from Ukraine, and they needed a place to live, and they got a house to live in for free, thanks to me. That's pretty great, right? Like, I'm super encouraged. I received that news. People said, yeah, like, this is happening, and it's all happening because of you, Ryan. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's overwhelming. And so let me tell you how it happened, right? Because how many of us have, I know I have, when I heard the news of the invasion, I was like, God, I don't know what to do. Ukraine is so far away, and I have nothing to do with them. And how am I going to make a difference at all? Is there anything I could possibly do? And there wasn't, starting then. But unbeknownst to me, God had already been working from years prior. So we can rewind and tell you the story. So 2016, I graduated from seminary. And I got a job in Orlando. And I was leading this church in Orlando and figuring out what it is to be a pastor and figuring out making mistakes. And particularly, one of the things I was burdened by in Orlando, because I had, prior to that, been like a missionary. I had been working in college campuses, shoestring budget, I've got a pen and a notepad to work with, and let's find a coffee shop we can meet at, let's do some ministry. And I moved, and all of a sudden they were giving me a pension and health benefits, and I had a stipend for gas, and I had a big campus to work with. I mean, College Park, they had quite a few more buildings and more square footage than this, on less land though. And I have this theology that says, if you have something you don't need, then it's for someone else. right? If you've got an extra burrito, you need to find the hungry person. Because God gave you that extra burrito for the hungry person. They need it, you don't need it, right? Like that's what it's for. And so I'm always asking that question, right? Hey, if I have a need, who in the community needs to provide that need? Because there's probably someone who has something extra who's burdened by it. And if I have a resource, who in the community needs this resource? And man, College Park, they just had so many resources. They had this big building, sat empty all week, and particularly, and kind of a hoarding problem. Like there's just, rooms full of just storage, just old furniture and, couches and stuff. And we lived in a manse, so they had a house on the property, and then they had another house on the property that was just full of junk, just full of, we might need it someday. And I started working with the church theologically, patiently, talking with the session, casting vision about, like, hey, let's give this stuff to people who need it. Like, we don't need it right now. There was a washing machine that we had in an old shed, and I found a missionary couple that needed a washing machine that couldn't afford one. We unloaded the washing machine, and then we celebrated that. Small things, small victories. And during all this time, Ukraine was not on my radar. Right? We're talking 2016, 2017. I had no compassion for Ukraine. They were one of 270 countries in the world. I wasn't thinking about it. And then we had a cleanup day, a church cleanup day, like one that we had here, actually, where we cleaned out the shed. And I kind of had the same attitude here as there, which was up or out, right? Like, let's get rid of it. If we don't have a use for it now, we'll get another one when we need one, and just pushing this kind of thing, and eventually we got to the place where we cleaned up this extra house on campus. And then the question became, what are we going to do with this extra house on campus? What do we do with it? What could it be? Could we do a nursing station there? Could we do a homeless shelter? Could we do, and Tiffany and I were working with couch surfing. You've heard that story from my installation. And so started to cast the vision that said, what if it was just a place for someone who needs it? Well, what if we didn't bother to zone it differently, make it a residence, leave it zoned church use, but church use might be someone's allowed to sleep there sometimes, right? And just if there's a woman who needs to get away from an abusive spouse, or there's a family who lost their home in a hurricane, or there's a need, then we use, because we recognize, let's just dedicate and consecrate and acknowledge that this house is for Jesus, and we're going to use it for Jesus and things. And there was, some significant pushback. There was some, what about insurance? And we had to figure out, we got to redo the air conditioning, and we got to find money, and where are we going to find years and years of this, y'all. And here's the thing, I didn't know why. I just knew that, we've got stuff, and we got to do something with the stuff, right? We got to get rid of the stuff we're not using, and then now we've got a building, and what are we going to do with the building? Let's be curious, let's ask this question. And then I left. I didn't finish the job, I left. I had an opportunity to go vibe with this really wonderful church in Austin that made sense to me, and that I felt like I made sense to, and that it just worked better because in Orlando I had been the first ordained call. I had been the kid, the rookie pastor, and here was a church that was ready, post-pandemic to go in new directions and do new things, and I felt God calling me here. And it was so hard to leave behind because I felt like I had just made a breakthrough with the 118 house, with the vision, with the hope that this property that sat useless for decades was going to be used, and without me there wasn't going to be anybody pushing to make it be used. But I left, and I left a leadership vacuum, and I prayed, this is the opportunity they gave the house to this Ukrainian refugee family. And again, here's why I tell you this story. It's not a success story. It's not about how great I am. It's not about how right my theology is. It's about when we believe and when we have faith and when we think these things that we read about are really true and they really affect the real world, and we take small steps every day. It often can feel like filling a bucket with a hole in it. It often can feel like you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It often can feel like you're not making any progress. Things happen incredibly slowly, and we don't always know why, and we don't always know what they're leading to. But it makes a difference. Doing small things with great love. Being responsible for the things that you are responsible for. Taking care of your neighbors, being encouraging to them, taking care of your family members, doing your job and choosing to do it to the glory of God and do it with excellence and be curious and learn more things about what it takes to do it well. These things snowball. And when we defy the despair of the broken world and the attitude that nothing matters, and we say instead, well, I'm gonna try my hardest to just kind of do good, to just make a difference for quality, for like goodness of things. God can do incredible things, and in fact needs all of us too. That the responsibility has fallen to us. We don't have to do it all. I did not do it all. I didn't own that building, right? I wasn't even in charge of that building. Session was, and I didn't pass over the keys to this Ukrainian family. Other people did all of that, but they got to go back and say, hey, it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't pushed us. And there are so many good things in the world that are just buried like seeds in the soil that want to germinate. They won't germinate if it's not you doing the small, the loving, the kind things that God has called you to do. And when you do, I believe that we can stop school shootings. I believe that, as Lonnie prayed, that the next kid who's going to decide that he is just so broken and so messed up that the best thing he can do is go take an AR-15 and shoot up some people so the cops will kill him and the suffering will end, that kid can be turned around and we might find that kid and say, hey, why don't you ring the bell? And we don't know how much that will transform his life. To say, wait, I'm useful. I have a role. I have a job. I can be part of a community. I can belong. We never know the difference that we have the miraculous capacity to make. And in the face of suffering, in the face of even suffering, the size of the Shoah, the size of the Holocaust, we believe as a resurrection people that God can and will bring new life. And that's what this faith is all about. That's what I think we need to remember this Ascension Sunday. God has no hands nor feet.